Welcome to the Military Seahawk podcast. I'm your host, Melanie Nelson, the Military Student Services Specialist at UNCW. And today I'm interviewing Dr. Jon Kapell.
The Military Seahawk Podcast.
Dr. Kapell is not a student veteran, but he is a good friend to the Office of Military Affairs. And on today's interview, we're going to find out why. Hello, Dr. Kapell. I don't think I've ever called you that before.
No, that's kind of strange to hear those words coming out of your mouth, but thank you for having me. It's absolutely a pleasure.
Well, we're happy to have you here. So again, Dr. Kapell, a.k.a. Jon, is not a student veteran, but he does hang out a lot with the Office of Military Affairs, and he's done some research about student veterans and transfer students and a lot of other cool stuff. So we are going to get started, and even though he is not a student veteran, we're going to ask the same question that we ask on all the interviews where we work with student veterans, which is, when you were a little kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
As I think about this question, and I do reflect back when I was a little kid, and of course I feel like I'm just a bigger adult version of being a kid right now, I actually wanted to be an Apache helicopter pilot.
You wanted to be an Apache helicopter pilot.
I thought that was the coolest thing ever, and having just the Apache helicopters, the birds of prey in the sky was just absolutely phenomenal and fascinating, and I wanted to be a helicopter pilot when I was a kid.
Where did you find Apache helicopters?
They flew overhead. I grew up in Pennsylvania, so I would often either see them at various areas flying overhead or just reading about them in books when I was a kid. So I thought that was just absolutely one of the coolest things out there. And of course, there was an old TV show, I think it was with Nighthawk, or it was... I can't remember the name of the show, but it was a helicopter pilot, and he flew around and he saved the day, and he stole a helicopter, and it was around the same time as Knight Rider, so it was just fascinating.
I don't know what that is, but I'll take your word for it.
I may quietly, because no one can see me do it, search online while we're having this conversation, and I might actually look it up and get a real answer to that question. So
okay, we'll include the link in our show notes after we finish recording. So this was when you were like early elementary school?
Yes, when I was just, was under 3 feet tall.
Under 3 feet tall. Okay, so then as you progress through 4 and 5 and 6 feet tall, you are a fairly tall person. How did your aspirations grow along with you?
The funny part about it is I did think about joining the military up through the high school years. And that was I graduated high school in 1991. So that was when we started getting ready to go to war. And I remember being 18 and seeing news reports about going to war, and it terrified me. And it was one of those situations in my life where I said, I really want to serve, but I don't know if being in the military is the best thing for me or for them at that time. So I started thinking about going to college, and I ended up going to Westchester University, which is in Pennsylvania, about 40 miles away from Philadelphia. And I ended up, not what you should all be doing as students, but I declared my major when I was a senior in college because...
Did they let you do that?
They let me do that so long as I was actively taking classes toward what I thought would become my major, which was business. So I didn't declare my major in business because I realized that numbers and math and myself, we weren't friends.
You weren't best buddies.
We were not even in, like, if math were a friend and he was a cool kid, he wouldn't invite me to sit with him at lunch. So, I ended up getting my undergraduate degree in communication studies. So,
kind of the traditional shift from business for people who don't really like numbers, but do like to sell things and marketing and all that.
Sure. And it was just one of those, I could talk quite well. I am one of those people that on campus, you will typically hear me before you see me.
True story.
Very true. I'm loud and outgoing, and I don't have hair. So you add all those things together and it's, hey, where's that loud bald guy? Oh, we hear him coming. So, yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but somewhere on your email signature or something, it says your number one Clifton Strength, which is...
My number one Clifton Strength is communication, and then my number 3 is woo, which stands for winning others over. So I do like to network and connect and meet people, so it's fairly dangerous when I go to Walmart and I'm standing in line. If there is a line, I will inevitably start talking to the person either in front of me or behind me or engage all 3 in conversation.
I believe you. Okay, so let's back up a minute. So,
Yes.
in college, what was the best thing about college for you?
Oh gosh, best thing about college was just being able to recreate who I was going to become and just being my own self. I grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, so it was South Central Pennsylvania. I decided intentionally to go to a state public institution because I wasn't sure college was the right choice for me. So if I was going to spend money, it was going to be as little money as possible to have a valuable life lesson. So I really enjoyed going to college, but I enjoyed that chance to recreate who I was. And I was the only person of my graduating class from high school that went to Westchester University. So out of 392 students, I was the only one who went there. So essentially, no one knew who I was when I got to college.
Nobody knew you got to be anybody you wanted to be.
I got to be anybody I wanted to be, and the unfortunate part of all of this is that I actually stayed who I was, the loud, outgoing person, and it just seemed to work for me. When I got to college, my freshman semester, I went to orientation, and I remember one of the folks that I met at orientation who said to me, "Do you think you're going to join a fraternity?" And I said, "Nah, I don't think it's for me." I ended up joining my fraternity my first semester of my freshman year, and at the time it was one of the best decisions I could have made. And going very far forward, I served on my national fraternity board of directors for 14 years. So I was involved and engaged in college in the fraternity world all 4.5 of my years in college, because we did a half victory lap, because when you declare when you're a senior, you have to finish all your course requirements, and that took a little extra time to do that when I didn't declare until I was a senior. So again, for the listeners out there, not what you're supposed to do.
But also, we're not going to judge you for staying for one more semester to tie things together.
Perfectly. You have fun, do the things you want to do. So best thing about college was recreating, but also the friendships that I created, the opportunities. I interacted with a university administrator named Charlie, and Charlie was my Greek advisor. And to this day, many years after I graduated from college in 1995, I'm still in contact with Charlie, and he's still at Westchester. So I've maintained that connection, and it's kind of shaped the pathway for me in the work that I do to want to stay involved and engaged with students long after they graduate. So I've been at UNCW I'm in the middle of my 14th year here, and there are students from my first year that I'm still in contact with, and I have students every year that I maintain contact with long after they graduate, whether that's checking in on them, meeting their children, which is frightening when I think about my kids or having kids, and also just connecting alumni with current students so that they have those connections of Seahawks and future pathways to meet and connect with other folks. So it's been a lot of fun work, and especially working on a college campus, but we'll get there.
Yes. So what's interesting here is, so you had this idea that maybe you might go into the military, and then you also considered college. And so obviously with student veterans, the conversation usually goes the other way. And then they decided, well, I wasn't sure if college was for me, so I went into the military. You chose the opposite. And then I guess while you were in college, we were having the Desert Storm conflict. Mm-hmm. What did that look like from your perspective?
I had friends who went and served in Desert Storm, and there are parts of my life that I have some regrets, and one of those regrets is that perhaps I didn't join the military, and I think that would have been a good opportunity for me. I from the communication and conversations I've had with some students who've been military students, it's not exactly a completely rigid military structure, which is what I thought that it was, but there was definitely a structured outline of life and how things got done, and I yearned for some of that in some of my areas of my life. And I have a bit of an arrogant saying I sang to my partner and to other people: if people just did what I told them to do, everything would work out fine. And I realized that sometimes that might work in a militaristic setting, but other times might not. But I like to think I know how some things should happen, so I offer that advice to myself oftentimes versus saying it out loud. But I chose to go the college route versus military, but I kind of have that regret of what would life have been like had I joined the military.
Yeah. It's funny because a lot of people who join the military, we might say, I would never want to do it again, but I'm glad that I did it once, like, because we don't know any differently. We don't have the option of going back and finding out what we would have been without it, right?
I always find it fascinating when I interact with individuals who've been in the military, whether they're students or otherwise, and I ask them how long they served, and some tell me, I did my 4 years and I'm out, and some others say, I'm realistic, I can't wait to do it, and it's just, I see a wide variety of folks who choose both routes.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways to interact with the organization. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But also interestingly, so you started your college career thinking, oh, no, I don't want to be part of a fraternity. And then all of a sudden you get absorbed into this Greek life and you become, the president of the national chapter or something?
I was the vice president of standards and risk management for my national fraternity. So I was the adjudicator of the policy of the my fraternity, which...
And that was a good role for you because you had figured out how to break all the rules while you were in college.
I did. And for those who can't see Melanie's face, she's laughing at me right now, which is totally appropriate. So yeah, I did that for about 6 years, and I shut down many chapters of my fraternity and removed individuals from the organization because they didn't meet our standards and our ideals. And it was one of those things that you hated to do it, but knew it had to be done. And after 6 years of doing that, of my 14 years, when they said, do you want to switch roles? My answer was an abundant yes. I would love to change around having to adjudicate and punish for those individuals who make poor decisions versus, and it's not to say that everybody was kicked out who did something wrong. We definitely look for those learning opportunities. But at the same time, there are some individuals who perhaps join the fraternity for very wrong and different reasons from what we think that a fraternity should be about.
Yeah. I just find it interesting that you would have been part of the fraternity while you were in college, and then it's supposed to be like for networking, right? So afterwards, like that's one of the big draws of joining a fraternity. And for a lot of people, I think that it doesn't work that way. Like they get out of college, they get their job, and they get involved in their own little worlds, and then they kind of forget about that whole network, and maybe they come back to a couple of events and maybe they don't. But it sounds like you made the networking really work for you and continues to work for you.
I did. And it's funny because students will say to me, well, John, you were in a fraternity. I said, no, I am in a fraternity. And I need to clarify, especially with members of our fraternities and sororities, that this is a lifelong commitment. It's not just a commitment of a 3 to 4 year thing. And I think I look at that too. And I think I've seen or heard the phrase that once a Marine, always a Marine. And I think of that with the military, that you don't just join for 2 to 4 years. That becomes part of who you are for the rest of your life. And that's going to help shape who you are, who you're going to become, and how maybe people interact with you as well.
It definitely shapes how people interact with you. The number of times people have said to me, but wait, you were in the military, weren't you? And it's just something I said. And they look at me and I was like, but I never told you I was in the military. And they're like, oh, but we could just tell. I think,
but it's funny when I hear that, it's not a condescending, it's completely a mark of respect that I have for that individual, even more so than I might have already given them to find out they're in the military. So for you, when I found out you were in the Navy, I was like, that's so freaking cool that she's in the military. And it's not where you are in my mind. And that's where I it's just very impressive.
It's just funny how sometimes student veterans think, because so we did do something unique, right? Like there are not very many people in the world who can say they were in the military, but there are other organizations out there that mimic the military structurally, or that mimic it in terms of providing this network and carrying it on. And what we find is sometimes with student veterans, they want to sort of like drop the veteran identity when they get to school, and they're like, no, I just want to be a regular college student now. In so much as I can. Sure, I'm a few years older, or maybe I have a little more experience, but I kind of want to let that part go, and I'm not going to use all the resources that we have here. I'm just going to be myself. And on the one hand, I sympathize because it is tricky to kind of navigate that. Like, I'm a veteran, but I don't want to be seen as super militaristic, and I'm not that intense, or I'm trying not to be so intense anymore. But then we have, I think somebody said you need to leverage the veteran status to get what you need out of the community.
Yeah, I think from my understanding and some of the research that I've done, is that student veterans have a wealth of resources available to them, which I think they should feel comfortable, be able to take full advantage of, absolutely. But I think outside the classroom, and I think it behooves a classroom environment to disclose that you're a member of the military, so long as the faculty member knows to use that in positive ways in the class. And that is, talk to us about your experience in the military. I think it was a book that I read, See Me for Who I Am, which is a phenomenal read. One of the stories talks about a student veteran wanting to be in the classroom and not just saying, I don't represent all military individuals, but here are the experiences I've had that have shaped me, and here's what I can bring to add to the academic environment. And I think that's critical for a veteran to feel comfortable to do that, and not for a faculty member to say, hey, I need you to speak on behalf of all entire military forces and speak, and what you say represents every single person, because that's not fair, because everybody's experience is different, so we need to be able to take what that person brings to the class, appreciate and value it, and be able to use that as education for other people, but not the sole source of education for all people to represent all the military.
Yeah, it's simply not fair to be asked to represent the entire population. While it is a small population relative to the rest of the world, there's a multitude of experience within there. And during Green Zone training for our faculty and staff, I give the analogy of if you're going to deploy on an aircraft carrier, your deployment is going to look a little bit different if you're in the bridge driving the ship, and if you're flying a plane on and off, and if you're waving the plane on and off, and if you're cooking the food for everybody to eat, and if you're down in the engine keeping the ship running, and if you're doing the laundry. Like, everybody's going to have a different experience, and that's just one platform in one branch of the service in one overall military.
Yeah, I think there's just, it's fascinating. I think, the GI Bill, the ability to go to college, and I was getting ready to say the affordability, and I was going to say that's not actually true anymore. It's expensive to go to college.
Sure.
And I think any advantage that you have to pay for and afford college, and if you have access to college, then, and if that's something that you want to do, I do it. I think having access to the resources financially to offset the cost of college or pay for college completely is a phenomenal benefit. And of course, from my personal perspective is, when I did my doctoral work, I did it here at the university, and I got 5 out of my 8 classes per year for free. So it was a significant discount of what I paid. If I'm able to use a discount, I think people who have the opportunity for discounts for college, and if that be the GI Bill, then absolutely use that to your advantage and maximize that time and that experience.
Yeah, for sure. So tell us about your role here at UNCW that
Yes.
you've been in for 14 years now.
So 14 years, I have been the oversight person for the Campus Activities and Involvement Center, which is the gateway to engagement for our students to give them things to do outside of the classroom. And it's not necessarily that myself or the staff that works with me is solely responsible for all involvement engagement, but our job is to promote it and to get the word out there. So I do a lot of promotion for events and activities that I have nothing to do with, but that's a way to get our students involved and engaged. So every Tuesday, we send out the hockey news out of my office to highlight events. Of that list of 8 to 10 different events, maybe 2 or 3 are somewhere affiliated with my office. The rest are promoting other folks' events. We have about 280 student organizations here at UNCW, so a wide variety of opportunities, and we have new clubs that start every single year. I'm personally working with about 8 to 10 different groups at this moment, and I've got other staff that are working on other groups. So we'll see maybe 25 to 30 new student organizations form each year, and at the same time, some groups tend to fall to the wayside. They don't want to re-register. So we have a bit of a positive ebb and flow in that when I first got here in 2006, we had 169 student groups, and now we're at about 280, 285. So it's definitely shown some growth over time, but the campus population has grown from 12,000 in 2006 to 17,499 to be exact, per the words of our chancellor. So we're definitely growing as an institution. So my office runs weekend programs, that is to give alcohol-free programming alternatives on Thursday, Fridays, and Saturdays. And that we find is for those students who don't drink and don't want to drink, but they want to go to activities and be social where they can be in an environment where alcohol is not the primary focal point. So ice skating, trips to Myrtle Beach to go shopping and then go to medieval times, perhaps. We'll do make and takes, we call them, like arts and crafts, paint like Bob Ross. Students love to be able to do that. We just did a fall fest this past weekend out of my office. So we had pumpkin painting. It was family friendly. We had a hayride on campus. So first time we'd ever tried it, and students had a really good time. We lit some fire pits and had s'mores. So as soon as we cracked out the s'mores, we were bum rushed by the students to say, give us all of the chocolate and the s'mores and the marshmallows, and they were having a toasting frenzy. So it was a really fun event. So we do kinds of programs along those lines. But I also, one of my job duties is I advise the Student Government Association. So it's the student body president is a voting member of the Board of Trustees. We have a dedicated position, which is a military representative on the student government. So we do hear the voice of the student veterans, and we have a variety of representation across the rest of campus. So that's kind of just a bit of a 30-second-ish, longer than that probably, snapshot of the work that I do. But we're committed to getting students involved and engaged. So we want to hear how we can better do that. And we're actually, my office is open Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays until 8 o'clock at night, and Thursdays and Fridays until 5. So if students have evening hours or they want to come get involved, we'll at least get them started in that direction.
Yeah. So I've heard your office referred to as the cake office.
Yes. But no, we don't serve cake and cake, but it's CAIC, which is Campus Activities and Involvement Center. So we get that question at least a dozen times a year. Hi, I represent the cake office. Do you have cake? No. Well, why should I come to your office? Here's all the reasons.
I mean, if you offered cake.
If I offered cake, yes, we'd have a much larger student body.
I'm just saying.
Yes.
In the veterans world, it's always give them free food, and then everything will happen after that.
I think in any world, if you give any person, mostly college-age genre students, free food, they'll show up for things.
True story.
Yes.
So what is the best part of your current role?
Oh, gosh. The best part of my current role, other than opportunities like this, shameless plug, I think for me, it's getting to interact with a wide variety of students. I'm not a person who likes the day-to-day to be the same day-to-day. I like it when it's different and there's a variety. So every day presents a new challenge. We've got a new program, but I also get to interact with a variety of students. And yes, I do work with some students throughout the course of their 4 years. And those are the students that I tend to stay in contact with. So, one of my fun stories is I had a student who came to me and said, "Hey, John, I'm looking for a connection in the social media world because I want to go into social media marketing after I graduate. Do you have any contacts?" I reached out to a former student who graduated in 2009, and I said, the student's name who graduated alumni is Brian, and I said, "Brian, would you mind serving as a point of contact?" And I knew he worked for a social media company. I couldn't remember exactly which one, so I hit him up on Facebook, ironically enough, and he sends me an email back, and he says, "Yep, I'd love to help you connect. My email is so-and-so at fb.com." And I said, "Oh, crap.
Is that actual Facebook?
You work actually for Facebook." He's like, "Yeah, I'm in the San Francisco office." So I went back to the student and said, "Hey, Julian, I've got a student," former student Brian, and I said, "Does it work for you if the social media company you want to connect with is Facebook?" And his jaw dropped. He's like, "Yeah, that'd be fine, thank you." So he was ecstatic, so got the two of them connected. But that's kind of what makes my job really fun is I can be a connecting person between students and alumni, and I love to see, current students connect with alumni because it really, I do buy into the idea that it's a Seahawk country, that it's part of our culture, and that we do care for each other. So if I'm halfway across the country and I see someone wearing a UNCW sweatshirt, I'm going to stop and talk to them and tell them I work for the institution, that I myself am an alumni as well, because I want that connection. So I've done it before. I've really enjoyed it, and I think that those are some positive aspects. And honestly, it's fun to work on a college campus. I mean, it really is. It's a good time. People are friendly, they're nice, and it keeps me young because I graduated from college a little while ago, and some days I feel older than others, but I really enjoy the college age population.
Okay. What's the worst part of your job?
Worst part of my job, work-life balance is not a thing.
Because you're working on a college campus with college students.
Because I happen to be working on a college campus with students, yes. Because we don't work on a schedule that works for me. If I got in at 8 o'clock in the morning and I said I'm leaving at 5 o'clock every day, and that's just not going to work for college students. So, for me, it's 2 to 3 nights per week, and occasionally 1 to 3 weekends per semester is about an average that I'm going to give up to spend time. So work-life balance is a struggle. And having a partner, and she has 2 children, and it becomes a little more difficult sometimes to find that opportunity to really focus on them. But there are times when I'll invite them. They came to Fall Fest, so they got me work this past weekend, and I got to see them for a little while, and we cooked a s'mores together and had some fun, and then they head home, and I catch up with them later on. So that's if I'm looking at things that are the worst possible parts about a job, I'm not climbing into nuclear reactors. I'm not doing brain surgery with shaky hands. I'm working with college students, and if the worst part of my job is I spend extra time with them, then that's really not a bad thing. I'll take it.
The best thing is working with college students. The worst thing is working with college students.
Yeah, it is. But just think of all the free pizza we get.
So much pizza. The Military Resource Lounge fridge is full of pizza from an event that we had over the weekend. So yes, there's lots of pizza. In fact, we may have dinner together after we're done recording this.
How many pieces can you eat?
How many pieces can you eat? Let's not do that. Okay. So earlier in the episode, I referred to you as a Dr. Kapell.
Yeah. Right.
So you have a doctorate of education.
I do. It's a doctor in educational leadership and higher education. So I did it at UNCW here because it was a program that was growing, developing, and a program of opportunity. The tuition remission was an excellent opportunity for me as well. And I got to know some of the faculty and had looked at that at the time and said, I want to learn from them. So I graduated with my doctoral degree in May of 2017. So I've been a doctor for about 2.5 years, and people, especially kids, when I tell my doctor, like, can you fix my boo-boo? And I'm like, not that kind of doctor.
Not that kind of doctor. Don't ask me to do that.
And they don't understand. I'm like, I'm supposed to be a smart doctor, and then I realize I'm probably not as smart a doctor as medical doctors.
Or if I have to explain it, maybe I'm not as smart as I thought I was.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. So you did some research.
I did.
And published some research
I
for
was
that
able
program.
to publish a little research, and this was exciting to me, and I'm hoping it's exciting to you all who are taking the time to listen as well. And if you ask me what topic would I like to study more, it's this topic. So I took a class called Today's College Student in my doctoral program. And in doing that, I was partnered with 2 other students, and what we ended up doing was conducting a study on student veterans because we want to know what their lives were like. And what we also did was partner with a faculty member, and she had said to us, I'd like to add some additional questions into your study. So she wanted to know about high impact educational practices, and these were things that college students do. It's like intensive writing, intercultural competency. These are things that you specifically focus on by the act of taking some classes that helps you become a better college student and further retains you to stay at the institution. So there's 10 high impact practices, or HIPs as they're called, that are outlined. And when we studied, we did interviews with 14 student veterans at 3 different institutions. And I went back and I looked at the data, and I was able to work with some faculty members. And what we found, it was fascinating stuff. Sorry, I'm going to sound like a dork. We studied these students, and what they really told us in terms of what are the barriers, what are those things that are stopping you from actively participating in high impact educational practices, and what stops you doing these things. The first thing they came up with in terms of theme was mission orientation, that they had a goal, and that goal was to graduate from college because they had a defined amount of time in which they could use their GI Bill. And if anything was going to get in the way of them finishing that, they weren't about to do it. And that's where the mission orientation. The second was competing priorities, where we're looking at student veterans who are not your traditional age college students. Some of these folks are married, some have children, some live a significant distance from the campus. And if they had something that was going to get in the way and compete, as far as if college was going to compete with a priority, or if high impact practices was going to compete as a priority, they weren't going to do it either. The last thing we saw as a barrier was that the students said, we don't know what HIPs are all about. And there was one student who used the term called WIFM, which is what's in it for me. And he wanted to know, if I do this, what do I get out as a result of it? If I'm going to commit to a high impact educational practice, is that going to guarantee me a job? Is that going to give me something that I'm going to want? And we need to do a better job in terms of helping the students by making events family friendly. If they wanted to participate in these kinds of activities, we had to help and facilitate the process of them getting through the use of their GI Bill in their college classes, and that's that mission orientation. And lastly is we need to tell them what the high impact educational practice could do for them. And we weren't doing those things. So that's kind of helped us shape a little bit of our activities. And when I got the article published, I shared it with Bill Kaczynski, and he looked at it and said, this is great information, was able to think about incorporating some of those things. So we studied that, and I would love to do further studies on student veterans, because everything that I was able to read at the time was fascinating. I've done follow-up reading of books. the student veteran population is an incredibly fascinating group, and one that is almost completely untouched when you start thinking about what their life is like actually on a college campus. So this to me was the fascinating dorky stuff. For them, it's their lives, and I think it's our duty and our obligation to learn more about this, to share that knowledge with other people.
I mean, it's good that you're like fascinated in a however dorky, geeky, nerdy fashion about the research that you spent a significant chunk of time doing.
But it was yes, it was a fascinating, and yes, it took a chunk of time, but it didn't feel that way. I remember I was traveling one weekend, and I'm literally sitting in the Charlotte airport, sitting on the floor with all of my research around me, and I'm categorizing research, and I'm trying to get all this done in a time frame, and it's just, for me, people walking by staring at me as I'm like a little kid sitting on the floor of an airport, just putting papers in different stacks, piles, and started writing up my research. So it was fascinating, exciting. So.
You just couldn't keep your hands off it.
I really couldn't. I was like, don't touch my papers. These are my papers.
These are my papers. In other words, you found like your métier. You found what you needed to be doing with your life for that time.
I did, absolutely. And I think when we look at future research, and I would love to, and I got to work with Dr. Jess Bursma as well on this, who is, if I'm correct, ex-Special Forces in the Army. And he was the one who really spent time with me sitting in coffee shops, helping me craft and write the writing, because there is an art to it. And until that moment, I didn't really have a good firm understanding. And that was even before I finished my doctoral degree. So he was educating me and mentoring me along the way. And it's one of those things that I can look at and say I was able to work alongside him and Dr. James DeVita and Dr. Michelle Parker as well in getting that research published.
Yeah, it's good sometimes to hear about what it's actually like to be an academic who enjoys the research aspect, right? Because some people just want to teach classes, and you do teach some classes as well for the leadership minor.
I teach in the leadership minor here at UNCW. I teach leadership and communication, which is a great class, and I teach principles of leadership. And next spring, I'll be teaching practice of leadership. So actually, how you apply that leadership. And I when I step back, one of the students, student veteran I had interacted with, I shared the article with him because he said I had heard you written an article, and I shared it with him, and he came back to me a week later. He said, I had no idea you cared about us. And my response was like, I care about all of you. He goes, no. You care about the student veteran population, and we didn't realize that. And I was humbled, and I was saying to myself, this is incredible. I didn't even know what to say at that time other than thank you. So it's fascinating to be able to kind of convey care, concern, and just a genuine interest in the student veteran population.
And it's nice to be able to do research that has a direct impact on somebody, right?
Yes.
Like, because we can take that information in the Office of Military Affairs, and we take this information about high impact practices. So I think one of them is probably participating in the uni class in Uni 201, the transfer student seminar. Guess what? We advertise that heavily during orientation when we meet with our military affiliated students. I'm teaching a section of that so that we can say somebody from the Office of Military Affairs cares so much about this high impact practice that we are going to dedicate extra teaching time to it. We also talk about the Teal Bridge Mentor Program, where students can get involved with a transfer student who came through before them, and then they turn around and act as their mentor, and it's just an extra person to reach out to and get their questions answered. And we advertise both of those, and we actually make it very, very clear. We in the Office of Military Affairs hope that you will participate in one or both of these programs, because what's in it for you is you'll stay in college longer. You will probably graduate if you participate in those programs. You will feel better about your time at UNCW. You will feel like you know more people. It is tough to make a new community when you are leaving the military community. And we say this, we work with all military affiliates, so not just student veterans, also their spouses and their children. But we do try to make it like an established practice. We want you to participate in these things. They exist for you. You are part of a special population. Take advantage of this, right?
Exactly. And I think from a non-military background for myself is if you're a student veteran, I'll encourage you, take that risk, talk to somebody who is a faculty administrator, share with your veteran, develop that bond, develop that relationship, because if I have an opportunity to network and connect and bond with a student veteran, I'm gladly going to accept that opportunity. So I think that's exciting stuff to me.
Yeah. Okay. So we're coming up to our last question here.
Sorry, I'm talking way too much.
No, we're very excited about this topic. We really do care about student veterans here.
We do.
Okay. The last question for today is this. If you could retire tomorrow, what would you do with your time?
If I could retire tomorrow, what would I do? I struggle with not working. because I enjoy the work and that's the good and bad problem is I enjoy the work that I do, and I enjoy working with college students. As I mentioned earlier, it helps keep me young. I would love to work as long as I can, but I also recognize that if someone said to me, today is your last day of work, you are not allowed to come to work, tomorrow you have to do something different, I'm going to do some traveling. I'm going to go to places I haven't been before. I'm going to explore different areas. I have not done a great deal of international travel. I've been to Canada, which is international, sure. I've been to Ireland a couple of times. I've been to Italy and Amsterdam, and then Dominican Republic, and that is it. And I think there are so many other areas of the world to travel that I would really enjoy seeing. So I think for me, travel would be important, trying different foods and cuisines and different experiences. I have zero desire to parachute into a volcano, so that's not going to happen, but I'm definitely going to explore and try and just experience the world.
I think there's a vast range of activities in between parachuting into volcanoes,
yes.
and lots of, other peaceful, pleasant walks along the beach and things like that.
But peaceful, pleasant walk on the beach are fun, but you're going to have some, I would just love to go to the annual tomato festival in Mexico. So, just where they sling tomatoes at each other.
Ambitions. Dreams, hopes, someday. All right. This was my interview with Dr. Jon Kapell. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you for having me.